The evening had started like any other for Admiral Sarah Jennings. After 6 weeks at sea overseeing complex naval exercises in the North Atlantic, the sight of dry land and the sounds of a crowded pub were exactly what she needed. The Admiral's Arms, despite its name, was her favorite spot in Portsmouth, a place where no one knew her rank, where she was just another face in the crowd. She had changed out of her service dress blues into a simple navy blue sweater and jeans, her short, graying hair hidden under a comfortable beanie. She found a small table near the back, ordered a pint of bitter, and allowed herself the simple pleasure of people-watching. The pub was thick with the usual Thursday night crowd. Sailors on leave, dock workers, and a few university students from the nearby campus filled the space with a boisterous, happy noise. A rugby match was playing on the big-screen TVS, and every few minutes, a collective groan or cheer would erupt from the patrons clustered around the bar. Sarah sipped her beer, a faint, knowing smile on her lips. She felt a sense of peace in this anonymity. Here, she was nobody. That illusion shattered in a single jarring moment. A group of young Marines, freshly returned from a training exercise, if their close-cropped hair and proud, swaggering postures were any indication, had claimed the area near the dartboards. They were loud, fueled by a few pints and the adrenaline of youth. One of them, a burly young man with a corporal's stripe on his sleeve and a face flushed with alcohol, was attempting to make space for a rethrow. He backed up, laughing at a joke from one of his mates, and barreled straight into Sarah's small table. Her pint glass wobbled precariously, beer sloshing over the rim and onto the worn wooden surface. Before she could even react, before she could right the glass, the Marine spun around. His expression was one of pure, entitled annoyance. He didn't see a woman old enough to be his mother, or a fellow human being he had just inconvenienced. He saw an obstacle. "Watch it, love," he slurred, his voice dripping with condescending authority. "Some of us are trying to have a drink after a hard day's work. Maybe you should find a table in the corner where you're not in the way." His two friends snickered, elbowing each other. Sarah looked up at him, her gaze steady and utterly calm. She had faced down screaming admirals, navigated billion-dollar ships through hurricane-force winds, and made decisions that could start or prevent armed conflicts. A drunk corporal in a pub was not a threat. He was a test of patience. "I was here first, Corporal," she said, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through the pub's ambient noise like a blade. She didn't raise it. She didn't need to. The use of his rank made him pause for a fraction of a second, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. But the alcohol and the encouragement of his peers quickly shoved that confusion aside. He leaned closer, his breath reeking of cheap lager. "Don't you corporal me," he snarled. "You're in my way. Now move." He punctuated his command by placing a heavy hand on her shoulder and giving her a rough shove. It wasn't enough to knock her from her chair, but it was enough to be an unmistakable act of aggression. It was a physical challenge. And the low murmur of conversation around them began to die down. Eyes turned towards the scene unfolding in the back of the pub. Sarah remained seated. She didn't flinch, didn't shrink back. Her eyes, the color of a winter sea, never left his. In that moment, the entire pub seemed to hold its breath. The young Marine, emboldened by the silence he mistakenly thought was fear, puffed out his chest. "You deaf as well as stupid? On your feet. Move along." One of his friends tugged at his sleeve. "Oi." Kyle, leave it. It's not worth it." But Kyle was too far gone, too invested in his performance of masculinity. Sarah slowly, deliberately, reached into the pocket of her jeans. She pulled out a simple, laminated identification card. She held it up, not with a flourish, but with the quiet authority of someone who was simply stating a fact. It was inches from his face. On the card was her photograph, her name, and a rank that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. It read, Jennings, Sarah E. "Admiral, Commander, United Kingdom Naval Fleet." The effect was instantaneous. The color drained from Corporal Kyle's face faster than the beer from his spilled glass. His jaw went slack. His eyes widened, not just in shock but in a dawning, soul-crushing horror. He was a corporal. He had just physically assaulted, shoved, the woman who was effectively the most powerful officer in the entire Royal Navy. The woman who commanded every ship he might ever serve on, every admiral he would ever salute. She was his boss's 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 boss, to an almost incomprehensible degree. "Please," he stammered, his voice a squeak, all traces of bravado gone. I didn't... I'm so sorry, His friends had frozen, their faces masks of terror. One of them looked like he was about to be sick. Sarah held his gaze for a long, agonizing moment. The silence in the pub was now absolute. You could have heard a pin drop from the other end of the building. She saw the fear in his eyes, the desperate realization that with a single word from her, his career, his entire future in the service he had chosen, could be over. He could be court-martialed for conduct unbecoming, for striking a superior officer. His life, as he knew it, hung on her next move. Slowly, she lowered the ID card and tucked it back into her pocket. She picked up a napkin from the table and calmly began to mop up the spilled beer. She took her time, yet letting the silence do its work. When she finally spoke, her voice was still quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. "You spilled my drink, Corporal." It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple statement of fact, an opening. Kyle stared at her, uncomprehending for a second, his mind racing. Then, a flicker of desperate hope replaced the terror. He stumbled towards the bar. "A pint of the best, whatever she was having," he shouted, his voice cracking. "And, I'd a plate of your largest Scotch eggs. Quickly!" The barman, who had been watching the entire scene with wide-eyed amazement, moved with uncharacteristic speed. Within a minute, a fresh, perfectly poured pint and a plate of food were placed in front of Sarah. Sarah looked at the offering, then up at the trembling young Marine still standing before her. She took a long, slow sip of the new pint. It was good. She didn't acknowledge him further. She didn't thank him, or she simply picked up a Scotch egg, took a bite, and returned her attention to the rugby match on the TV as if nothing at all had happened. Corporal Kyle and his friends stood rooted to the spot for a few more seconds, unsure if they were dismissed. Finally, they retreated to the farthest, darkest corner of the pub, their night of celebration utterly and completely ruined. They spoke in hushed, panicked whispers, occasionally glancing over at the quietly composed woman in the beanie, who was now their personal, living nightmare. The rest of the pub slowly returned to its previous hum, but the energy was different. People shot respectful, almost awestruck glances at the table in the back. Sarah finished her drink and her food in peace. As she rose to leave, she walked past their table. They all snapped to attention in their seats. She didn't even look at them. At the door, she paused and turned. She looked directly at the cowering corporal. "Next time, Corporal," she said, but her voice carrying just enough, "look before you leap." And with that, she was gone, leaving behind a legend that would be whispered in the pubs and barracks of Portsmouth for years to come. The story would be told and retold. The night a young Marine picked a fight with a quiet woman, only to find out he had just shoved the commander of the entire fleet. The tale served as a perfect, enduring lesson in humility, respect, and the fact that you never truly know who you're dealing with. And for Sarah, it was just another Thursday night and a very good Scotch egg.